definitely some inspiring people on this stage this afternoon, not least a particularly interesting person I've spent some time with recently, who's going to be talking about skills. Skills aren't the strategy until they are. So Chris Long, I'm going to read here so I can be sure to reference Chris's guests on this panel. So Chris Long, Kate Graham, Charlotte Lloyd, Teresa Rose, come and join me on stage. So Chris from Elevate Group, Kate Graham from Cornerstone, Charlotte Lloyd from Rolls-Royce, Teresa Rose from Rolls-Royce. I mean, this is an epic lineup. Come take a seat, a round of applause for sure. I'm going to hand you my microphone and have a lovely chat.
Well, hello. So now I'm get to sit down for a little while and I get these people to have a great talk. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself, ladies, first. We'll start from the middle, Teresa, and then Kate.
Hello. I'm Charlotte Lloyd. I'm Global Head of Future Talent and Skills. I own the strategy for our move to a skills-based organisation. Also a bit of capability and a bit of strategic workforce planning thrown in the mix as well.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Rose. I work with Charlotte. I'm the consultant for the skills governance and I've been with you for about 4 weeks, and previously I've worked in World Bank Group and London Stock Exchange Group on skills-based strategies.
Is that working? Oh, there we go. I'm Kate Graham. I work for a company called Cornerstone, so I spend a lot of my time talking about skills and trying to solve the skills problems in organisations like yours.
Awesome. So we'll jump in, and Kate, obviously your role, you're constantly scanning the horizon for macro trends, tech shifts, competitive signals. From your vantage point, what's one emerging signal that organisations cannot afford to ignore when it comes to skills and workforce transformation?
So the emerging signal for me is around the volume of change. So I'm sure everyone's here talking about AI today. There's a klaxon probably somewhere every time someone says it. But I think if you look outside of just the technological change, there's also, trade and tariffs, geopolitical situations, scientific evolutions, clean energy, all of those kinds of things are challenging organisations to have to pivot and adapt what they're doing, and you need the skilled workforce in order to be able to do that. And if you think that you are exempt from that, then you're going to pretty quickly find yourself falling behind the 8 ball. So I think it's important to step outside. I mean, obviously I do a lot of that in my role, but I think it's important to step outside of your organisation, mentally, and pay attention to what is going on outside.
Cool. Okay. Let's take that strategic lens that you just put on there and get so when we're looking for practicality, when you're actually, say, redesigning for agility, because I've just spent a lot of time with yourself at Cornerstone Spark. So at an enterprise level, how do you connect all those insights that you get to talent actions? How would you say that to it?
It's a great question. I think it is about the understanding of the talent actions in the context of the business. So it's your why, basically. Why are you doing what you're doing? And it's back to Rory's presentation actually this morning around you get what you measure. I'm a massive believer in that. And if you want to change behaviours, you sometimes have to change those metrics. So where your metrics might be around number of racks to be filled, etc., maybe that's not the point. Maybe that's the 80% of the Bs that Rory was talking about, and you've got to look into where you can be in that 20% and be able to think outside the box. So I think it's starting to look at, within the TA function, what are the goals and the measurements, and how actually do they align with those of the business. So sort of 2 columns in a spreadsheet probably. You could start quite basic, but I think otherwise you could be fiddling while Rome burns.
Awesome. So now I'm going to move on to Charlotte. So you're leading the enterprise transition to a skills-based model at one of the most complex organisations in definitely the UK, maybe globally. So what's been the biggest mindset or structural shift needed to move from, say, a legacy workforce model to one that's driven by skills?
So I think it'll come as no surprise that that mindset cultural element is probably the biggest. It's moving from saying, what job do I do, to what skills do I have, and therefore what value do I create in the business. So take that to a company of 20,000 engineers with an average tenure of 22 years, whose jobs are and mindset is deep rooted in, I've sat in a job for 10, 15, 20 years, therefore I am an expert, to a world where a graduate could be hired tomorrow and in less than 5 years be in the same position that you're in, because they have had that learning agility, they're able to learn fast and add value fast, and therefore they work up the ranks faster. So it's that mindset shift of, I don't have to sit in a job for 10 years in order to progress. But it's also, how do we start to actually deconstruct work so that we can then start to say, well, actually, when we understand what tasks need to be done for the job at hand, what is best sat with humans and what actually is the potential to be automated. So it's completely changing how we think about the world of work. And then structurally, how do you come out of a business that, and every one of your businesses probably will have that hierarchical structure, right, where you have someone at the top and it goes down like a tent, literally and metaphorically. So one thing that we've done at Rolls-Royce is, in trying to fix our internal skills crisis, by taking our engineers out of our empowered business lines, bulking them together in a division and saying, actually, you are engineering skills, and we're going to deploy you to where we think your skills best match the work that needs to be done. So structurally, we've made some really big changes, and we now need to start to look at that for the whole organisation. So it's a organisational design transformation, but the majority of it is, how do we start getting people thinking and behaving differently in the workplace.
Interesting. So taking that, how have you used technology to not only support this shift, but elevate employee experience along the way?
So I think for me, it's about making data really transparent. I think a lot of the times when you think about succession planning, talent moves, squiggly careers, you see it as something that HR does. And I think what we've done with the tech that we've got is really start to empower employees to say, you tell us what skills you've got. We haven't gone and bought an off-the-shelf skills taxonomy. We want you to tell us the backpack that you have, because skills aren't just defined by your current job title, as we all know. Everyone comes with a whole variety of skills. If we can empower people to tell us what those skills are, validate those through dynamic validation, through peer-to-peer feedback, through manager feedback, project feedback, etc., and then implement certain tech that will then link all of that together, that's where I think the utopia is from employee experience. Because what then happens is, which is what's happening at Rolls-Royce, is I put my skills in the system. I also put the skills I want to develop in the system. What then happens is I am served up the relevant learning that will help support the skills I want to develop, as well as kick mentors my way, gigs, secondments, you name it. But on the skills side that I already have, it will suggest jobs for me. So again, it takes almost the TA function out of the decision, because actually what you're then able to say, I don't want a linear career anymore, which everyone knows. You look up and think there's 2 people up there and actually we've got to wait till they retire. It start thinking about, how can I create a squiggly career for myself and have a career within a business and navigate it myself.
Awesome. That leads on to a question for you, Teresa. And I know that when we caught up, we have a love of tech. So there's a lot of talk about technology enabling this skills shift, right? But where does the rubber actually meet the road for you? And how are you using systems, or past or present, to create measurable value for real workforce agility?
As I mentioned at the top, I've worked in different organisations and they've each done it very differently, though there are some fundamental pieces that they all do. There are 3 key areas that I'd like to address in this area. The first one would be interoperability, and the issues around that. And the vendors, sorry Kate, but a lot of the vendors have driven this with these different proprietary taxonomies. They don't talk to one another. And I liken it to going into your kitchen drawer and you're trying to look for something and there's an old battery and there's this knife and you can't find keys for a shed or whatever it might be. And it feels like that when you're trying to get the data to talk to one another. So there's all these legacy, then new bits that people are adding on, or they might put another layer of skills technology in the mix. So that's one of the main challenges. So that does make it difficult, as you said, to measure it. A second area would be, we've stuck this label skills on it, but it becomes then an admin burden and you're not actually getting any measurable insights and data out of it. And then the third part would be context and trust. These systems are very different to other ones that we use within the people function, because the people are the data, and there needs to be a really strong, compelling value proposition and what's in it for me to drive them to go into the system and use it. And where I've seen organisations use this well, it's not been made mandatory. The data has been very transparent, as Charlotte said. People own the data, and then they can see and make data-informed decisions from the information that they're getting in the system, and then more broadly thinking about where and how you use that data to make different talent decisions and the validation of that data. So that goes back to it being an admin burden. You need to have that rolling process for what skills are critical to your organisation that you need to have that data on to make more robust, informed workforce planning decisions.
Awesome. So there was a little follow-up question, but you went a bit too deep there for me. So I'm going to open it up to all of you. So we've heard a lot about skills strategies, right? How do you, in your individual roles, ensure it's not just, how would you, from your individual roles, make sure it's not just a HR initiative, right? But truly embedded into business planning or investment decisions and operational design? Like, what would you give the audience as like your key for that? Start off, whoever wants to go first.
I'm happy to go first.
Cool.
I'm still holding the mic. Yeah. I say skills, one of the areas of skills is to be able to measure it, is make it discussable. So it's how are you having those discussions around skills in your day-to-day meetings. And as Charlotte said about having that data transparency, there's also an element of reporting and flagging leading insights as well. And other areas that I'm working with on organisations is around tolerance levels. You're always going to have a skill gap, but what becomes a risk and what doesn't in your critical skill areas. So I think that is some of the areas around, sorry, what was the question again?
So embedding it into business planning, investment decisions.
So it would be that. And then the other thing I would say is start to look at where it is in business planning up front. If you've got a new product line, a new innovation, whatever that might be, winning a new contract, where are skills playing the part in that?
Anything you would add, Charlotte?
I think for me, using the buzzword HR initiative, it's taking an HR initiative and making it a business imperative. I spend the majority of my time with the business and not with HR. I can't stand it when people say, oh, HR are here, and you think, oh God, is that how we're starting? And it's really interesting. We want skills to be the new currency of talent to work. So that's the HR bit. That's where we're trying to create the vision so the business can understand where we want the enterprise to go. But unless you work with the business to actually fix a business problem with skills, it will remain an HR initiative. So how do we start to use skills in things like strategic workforce planning with the S? So working with the business on saying, you know exactly what your resource plan looks like for 12, 3, 5 years. How do we start boxing clever and laying scenarios over that and starting to understand then where the skills gaps are and being really clever with then how we fill those. So it's how do HR add value to the business problem and helping kind of co-create the solution together.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what you guys were saying about talking the language of the business, but the other thing that I would say is I'm a big believer in pilots and proof of concept. So, you know, we at Cornerstone, we do that a lot, especially on this sort of skills journey that people are on. But I would say, you know, as somebody who works for a vendor, ask your vendors, ask your partners. If they're a true partner, they should be working with you on finding these pockets where there are business problems, apply some of this theory and strategy to solve for that one problem in that one pocket. And if that works, then work up from there. And you'll see that then break out of that confines of, it's a HR project.
Awesome. So, just picking up on something that you just said as well, Charlotte. So, from re-architecting job roles, right, to shifting how you think maybe about mobility, what are some of the unexpected ripple effects of moving to a skills-first model from your perspective? And we'll go across the panel again.
I think the word agility started to scare people, because I think for those of you that have seen Toy Story, the grabber machine, I think everyone just assumed that we would just lift and shift people all over the place and everything would be chaotic and no one would know whether they're coming or going and would pick up and drop projects off at a whim. And I think so that's certainly been one of the biggest shifts that we've tried to contain. The other ripple effect, I think, is challenging the way work gets done. Again, we're a very hierarchical business. We're deep-rooted in specialism and tenure. And actually, I think I mentioned this earlier, that when you start looking and deconstructing jobs, there's just a different question of what work should stay with humans and what should be automated, not to replace people, but so that humans can become superhuman and we can become great at what we are good at, and that's being creative, empathetic, strategic, etc. So I think people have started feeling really differently about the jobs that they're doing, but also opening up a whole, well, what does my career look like? It's no longer linear, it's squiggly, and actually what does that mean for me? So I think people are just becoming really curious.
I'm going to lean in there. Sorry, Chris, I know you're asking the questions, but on the deconstruction, do you think it's easier to think about the automation and the bots from a task perspective rather than a role perspective? Do you think it feels a bit less scary than, we're giving jobs to the human? But actually, I can see, for example, in my team, where we're automating, but it's not a whole job. It's just tasks and some of the work to be done. Do you think that makes a bit of a bridge?
Yeah, I think the language is a good one, isn't it? Because we've gone from saying chatbot to virtual assistant. We're trying to make the tech like a human. And I think when we talk about augmented organisations, it's about how do we lean into tech to make us better at what we do rather than being replaced by it. So it's challenging that narrative, isn't it?
So I will just jump in there quickly, because there was something that at Spark, and one of the presentations said about governing AI like employees. I know obviously that's from your company, Kate. What does that mean from Cornerstone? And then we can probably get a reaction from the two girls.
Yeah, I mean, one of our sort of talk tracks at the moment is, we've all talked about build, buy, borrow. Well, build and buy is old, really old. I'm really old. And then, build, buy, borrow, as we've moved into kind of that mental space of gigs, etc. And then it's build, buy, borrow, or bot. So what does that future workforce look like? Mark Benioff, I think, at Salesforce, or someone like that, has said, we are the last generation that will have only managed humans. Yeah. Everyone else coming up beneath us will have had some element of AI in their team. So I think that's the lens you've got to start thinking about. But I go back to my point, I think that's easier to do at a task level than a role level.
I think we want AI and automation to be able to give us like an MVP, but that's not, the automation, the AI isn't going to solve a problem. We're not going to, I don't think, ever use AI to go write a strategy and then follow it blindly. I think the human then becomes almost the validation part of the automation and the AI. So it's how do we shift the relationship between a robot taking my job to I'm working with robotics or AI, and that's not going to take my job, but someone that knows how to use it, use their critical thinking and analyse it and check it over and interpret it is going to take my job.
Teresa?
I keep asking organisations, what's your backup plan as well? So if you're going to over-engineer and over-augment, or like the Klarna example for it as a great example where they've had to bring people back in again because there's a skills drain and the service goes downhill and their profitability goes downhill. I was listening to a podcast on the way in here from an org development specialist, and he talked about fragility with that overuse of AI and the risks that we're also opening up, and the fact as well he's expecting another Enron quite soon. So there's also the CSR element to all this as well, and what you're giving back to your local communities in employment, and if profitability wins over everything, is that really the right thing to do?
Awesome. So we pivoted onto a question that leads quite well. We actually didn't plan that one. It's unbelievable. So obviously talking about in an age of real-time labour market, right, data, AI-powered skills ontologies, and massive tech investment, but how do you make sure that all that intelligence translates into better, faster decisions at a ground level from the perspective of where you're sitting?
I think it's really important to start with that work beforehand, is to map out your data. And going back to Kate's point earlier about prototyping and MVP, there's nowhere near enough of that happens. And if you're going to go down this route, it's really shines a spotlight on the work of HR and learning and development. And it's very exposing, though it can feel exciting. You've got to have all of your ducks in a row. You've got to have found out what could go wrong with this. You've got to do pre-mortems and post-mortems and learn and take time. And organisations are quite reluctant to experiment. So I've seen a couple of failed implementations in the clients that I've worked with, and they've had to go back to ground zero, or they've made it overly complicated. They're trying to measure everything, and you just can't do that. So that would be some of the lessons, is to start slow, to really do your test and learn, to experiment and to gather the data, and to think about your data ecosystem in this and where and how that data needs to be used to make those decisions.
Awesome.
Yeah, just building on that, something that we do a lot with customers at Cornerstone is what we call a phase zero. So it's that foundational work to be done. So it might be getting your job architecture sorted out. It might be getting some of those foundational pieces in play. And then at the other end is to think about the end of that. So you think about data. I always say around data there should be an SFW question, which is so effing what? I know Rory was swearing earlier. I feel like I can't be Rory. But, if you're going to spit out data, what does that data tell you? So, okay, great, you've upskilled X amount of people in Y skill. And, what does that report? So you were talking about reporting earlier, Charlotte. What does that tell you? So I think about the beginning and the end, and hopefully the middle will take care of itself.
Awesome. Yeah, I like it.
I think my answer will be about transparency and access to data, because I think a lot of the times data and reporting comes out of HR and people wait for a monthly, a quarterly, a yearly report. And I think actually if you give data to the business and allow them to start making their own decisions, they'll then feel empowered to do just that. So we crafted what we call a skills finder tool. So again, rather than it being a tool that HR have access to and you have to send an email or create a ticket to get the information, anyone in the whole organisation, or 45,000, can use this tool to search for skills in the business, and it will pull up a list of people that have those skills. So it starts to shift the conversation of what skills have I got around me in the immediate. I can't see any, therefore I go to HR or talent to try and find it. It actually empowers people to start thinking and making their own decisions around skills and the talent that's around them. So having that full transparency and access, I think, is key.
Awesome. So, I can't believe we've been going quite this long.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Doesn't it just? So we've got one more question. I'm going to open it up. So I want, if you could, just to the audience, if you could offer one piece of advice, right, to the audience, to anyone starting or beginning their journey towards a skills-based enterprise, what would you tell them? One to start, one to stop, and one to focus in on. Whoever wants to go first.
I've got two starts. Start networking, start talking to other people that are doing the similar thing, because if you're anything like me in my role, it's standalone. You don't have a whole function that comes with the task at hand. And it can feel quite lonely, especially when constantly you're trying to think what's next, no one else is doing it, or we're doing it differently, and it can be quite isolating. So I'd say network and get a good group of people around you so you can start co-creating as kind of an industry. Start storytelling. It's really hard to do. I've had to go on a couple of courses because, I'd stand and I'd kind of not read a script, but it would feel scripted, and then I didn't seem authentic. But as I started to storytell, and it's that balance between how do you inform and inspire, and tell real stories about what's actually going on in the business, squiggly careers, how people are actually using the data, it just shifts how you're trying to sell it and explain it from kind of more of a human, authentic way rather than just a load of bullet points that you've prepared. I would stop overcomplicating it. Don't try and boil the ocean. I think I tried to do everything all at once, and you realise that you then actually don't really have any impact at all. So go where the energy is, go where the business is almost pulling you. Where is there a business problem that you can fix with the work that you're trying to achieve and co-create? And I guess the focus would be cut the noise out. Lots of people are doing it differently. Some people are buying off the skill taxonomies. Some people are creating them internally. Some people are running at pace with reorging. Some people aren't. Do what's right for your business and try and cut a bit of the noise out, because it can be really, really overwhelming. So focus inwardly on what you're trying to achieve. What are you doing it for, rather than what do you feel like you should be doing because everyone else is doing it.
I would stop thinking about roles, which is really hard for you guys in TA, but start to think about that work to be done. So start thinking about tasks, and then how that flows into your job architecture and your setup. So those two go hand in hand. I think from a focus point of view, I'd say make sure that you are still looking externally as well. So it can be very, very easy to just get caught up on what you're doing in your organisation, but what's happening in the labour market, how are you benchmarking against your competition? Most organisations, most industries are going through some form of transformation at the moment. We know that there are skill shortages around, particular key areas of jobs that are required within some of those sectors, and how is that tracking? And what is that telling you about the labour market and your ability to hire and keep pace with the competition? So having that external data laid over your internal data, I think, is something to focus on.
And last but not least,
Stop chasing future skills lists. If you look particularly at the World Economic Forum, they've not changed that much over the last few years, and some of them aren't even skills, they're domains. I go like, oh no, not again. So stop chasing the future skills list. Think about your own data and what your own data is telling you. Start gathering use cases, and even if they're part completed use cases, go then to your business and say, oh, I've got these ideas, they're about 30% there. What would you add to this? And you can start to get down that co-creation route quite early with that, because you've given it some thinking. You may have put some metrics on. You've got lots of your own data that you can pull on, and external data, as Kate mentioned, that you could bring to the table with that. And then what was the focus? The focus would be focus on your own context and focus on your business cases once you've decided on them, and don't get distracted.
Awesome. And that does...
So not much.
No. And that does actually bring our time to an end, ladies. Who'd have thunk it that I would keep on time? Thank you very, very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed it, guys.